What I love about history is to look at it and look at it fully in the face and not try to hide parts of it or clean up parts of it or make it pretty, but you just deal with it. This is the story of what happened. The 19th Amendment was groundbreaking. It was hugely, incredibly important. But I always think of it as the 19th Amendment, asterisk.
Many white suffragists thought that the inclusion of African Americans would harm the cause, that would prevent the passage of the 19th Amendment. This was especially true in the South, where politically, most politicians were actively and passionately opposed to any enfranchisement of African Americans.
But there was always this sense of some women, some white women accepting women of color, accepting African American women and realizing the common cause. And then because of the history of racism in America, there were a set of women who really wanted to exclude them and keep them out of it.
But the part that's crazy is the degree to which some of the women who were suffragists, who really, really saw it so important that women had the opportunity to vote, had no problem selling their sisters of color down the river when it came to the vote. I feel a certain way about that, I have to say. It's so crazy. You see it here at the archives, right? There are letters where people will say, listen, if you really want white supremacy, the way to do this is to give women the vote. This is a great way to keep the Negro down. I mean, it's insane.
I just remember reading about, the struggle between Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, and Frederick Douglass and Sojourner Truth, who all pushed for women's rights. But when it came to the 14th Amendment and when it came to pushing for equal rights for African Americans, that took precedence because they were males.
Even at the Seneca Falls Convention, Frederick Douglass was the only person of color present, and he was a man. And although he was an abolitionist and pro-suffrage movement, he was a man.
I think that as women of color, African American women in particular, saw what was going on with the suffrage movement, they were trying to find their space. There always was the idea that we are women and we are African Americans, and that we intersect in ways both within the abolitionist movement, within the suffrage movement, within the civil rights movement. Women of color, African American women, are always trying to find their way in. And sometimes they have to force their way in.
And understanding all that really just gives you tremendous insight into what was happening in the United States, not just in the 1800s at Seneca Falls, but all the way through to the late 1960s in America as people tried to make sure that they were actually getting the vote.